The emergency room doors slammed open. Nurses rushed in, pushing a frail man on a stretcher. His face was pale, his breath shallow. Beeping machines filled the air with a terrifying rhythm. "Get out of the way. This is life or death," shouted Dr. Collins, one of the top surgeons in the city. But despite the chaos, whispers spread quickly. The man on the stretcher wasn't just any patient. It was Richard Langston, one of the wealthiest billionaires in America. The man who owned half the skyscrapers downtown. Doctors swarmed around him, 15 specialists, each shouting orders, flipping through charts and scanning monitors. Yet for all their degrees, their titles, and their egos, not one of them could figure out what was happening. Langston's chest heaved violently. His oxygen dropped. His lips turned blue. And standing just 10 feet away, holding a mop and a bucket, was a janitor in faded blue overalls. His name was Marcus Reed. He wasn't supposed to be near the emergency bay. He wasn't supposed to be watching the scene. But as his mop water sloshed quietly against the bucket, Marcus's eyes stayed locked on the man on the bed. Because he knew something the others didn't. And what no one else in that room realized was that Marcus's 17-year-old son, David Reed, standing silently by the vending machine with a backpack slung over his shoulder, would soon see the answer that 15 doctors had missed. But before I tell you how this ordinary janitor's son stunned the entire medical team and saved a billionaire's life, let me ask you, where are you watching from right now? Drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. And if you believe in justice, respect, and hidden genius, hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe so you never miss a story where the underdog wins. Alright, let's get back to the story. Marcus gripped his mop handle tighter as he watched the frantic scene. "His pulse is dropping," shouted one doctor. "Intubate him now," yelled another. "No, it's cardiac," argued a third. The chaos grew louder. Machines beeped faster. But Marcus's brow furrowed. Something about the billionaire's condition didn't look like a heart attack. He'd seen things like this before, not in a hospital, but in his old neighborhood when people couldn't afford doctors. Still, he stayed quiet. After all, who would listen to a janitor? David, meanwhile, sat quietly by the vending machine, sketchbook open on his lap. He wasn't drawing. He was scribbling calculations, diagrams, and little notes about what he overheard. Numbers came easy to him. Science came even easier. For years, his teachers whispered that David had the mind of a prodigy, maybe even a genius. But genius didn't matter much when your father was a janitor and you lived paycheck to paycheck. "Blood pressure's collapsing," one nurse cried. "Prepare for crash cart." The billionaire's body convulsed. Panic spread like wildfire. David looked up, his eyes narrowing. Something about the billionaire's skin tone, the way his fingers twitched, the uneven rhythm of his breathing. He flipped a page in his notebook and began writing equations. He whispered under his breath, "It's not cardiac. It's not respiratory. It's systemic, something they can't see." Meanwhile, Dr. Collins, furious at the lack of progress, barked orders at his colleagues. "I don't care who you are, save this man. His family's outside, and if we lose him, this entire hospital's reputation is finished." Marcus took a cautious step forward, his voice low, almost trembling. "Excuse me, doctors, but maybe—" Dr. Collins spun around, eyes blazing. What are you even doing here? This is a sterile environment. Get out before you infect the entire room." A couple of doctors chuckled under their breath. A janitor giving medical advice? Absurd. Marcus clenched his jaw but stepped back. Years of swallowing humiliation had taught him when to retreat. But David didn't flinch. His pencil scratched furiously against the page. His father noticed. "David, what are you doing?" Marcus whispered. David didn't look up. "Dad, they're wrong." Marcus froze. "What do you mean?" David finally met his father's eyes, his own blazing with certainty. "It's not what they think. And if they keep going like this, that man will die." In the waiting area outside, reporters had already begun to gather. The news was breaking. Billionaire Richard Langston rushed to the hospital, clinging to life. His daughter, Vanessa Langston, paced nervously, her designer heels clicking against the floor. When a nurse finally rushed out, Vanessa grabbed her arm. What's happening? Is my father going to make it? The nurse hesitated, eyes darting nervously. We're doing everything we can, ma'am. But the truth was, 15 doctors were failing. Inside, David shut his notebook and stood up. His father's voice followed him. David, don't. These people won't listen. But David walked forward anyway, his voice clear and steady. Stop. You're treating the wrong thing. The entire room froze. Every head turned. Dr. Collins sneered. Excuse me? Who let this child in here? David stood taller, gripping his notebook tightly. You're all missing it. Look at the symptoms. The skin discoloration, the spasms, the irregular breathing pattern. It's not cardiac. It's not respiratory. It's something else. The doctors exchanged annoyed glances. Collins scoffed. Oh, please. And who exactly are you? A pre-med student? A wannabe scientist? David's voice didn't waver. I'm just a janitor's son. But I know what's happening to him. And if you don't listen, he won't survive the next 30 minutes. The room erupted into murmurs, half mocking, half uneasy. Collins snapped. This is ridiculous. Security. But before anyone could move, the billionaire's heart monitor let out a piercing flatline. The room exploded into chaos. Nurses rushing, doctors shouting, defibrillators charging. And in the middle of it all, David's voice cut through like steel. I can save him, but you'll have to let me prove it. The billionaire's life was hanging by a thread. Doctors scrambled, out of ideas. A janitor's son stood against 15 specialists, claiming he had the answer. Would they ignore him, or would they take the greatest risk of their careers and let him try? The room was a storm of panic. Clear. A doctor pressed the defibrillator paddles against Richard Langston's chest. His body jerked violently as electricity surged through him. The monitor beeped once, then fell back into a flat line. Again! Another doctor shouted. Charge to 200. Marcus stood frozen at the edge of the room, heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to see this. But his son, his brilliant, stubborn son, stood in the middle of the chaos, refusing to back down. David's voice rang out again, cutting through the noise. You're wasting time. It's not his heart. It's poisoning. The doctors froze for just a second, then laughter erupted. Poisoning? Sneered Dr. Collins. What kind of nonsense? He's convulsing because his heart is failing, snapped another. Security! Get this kid out! 2 guards moved toward David, but before they could reach him, a desperate voice came from the doorway. Wait! Everyone turned. It was Vanessa Langston, the billionaire's daughter. Her eyes were wide, her makeup streaked with tears. Who said that? Who's talking about poisoning? David stepped forward, notebook clutched against his chest. Me, David Reed. My father works here. I'm telling you, your dad wasn't having a heart attack. He's been poisoned. Vanessa's face paled. She looked at her father's twitching hands, the strange discoloration creeping up his neck. For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. Poison, she whispered. Dr. Collins scoffed. This is absurd. He's a janitor's kid. He has no idea what he's talking about. But David didn't back down. He flipped open his notebook, the pages covered in equations, notes, and sketches. He pointed at them with trembling hands but steady eyes. Look, his breathing isn't consistent with heart failure. His muscle spasms aren't typical for cardiac arrest. The discoloration on his skin, the metallic taste he mentioned before he collapsed, those are all signs of mercury poisoning. The room went dead silent. Nurses exchanged uneasy glances. A couple of younger doctors looked at the boy with dawning uncertainty. Vanessa's lips parted. Mercury? How would he even? Because someone gave it to him. David interrupted. His voice dropped to a chilling whisper. And if you don't test him right now, he'll be dead in minutes. Dr. Collins slammed his clipboard down. Enough of this, he roared. This child is interfering with life-saving procedures. Security, remove him immediately. But before the guards could move again, Vanessa stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but her words carried weight. Stop. Don't touch him. If he's right, and you ignore him, and my father dies, I'll hold every one of you personally responsible." The doctors froze. Collins's jaw clenched. He looked at Vanessa, then at the boy, then back at the failing billionaire. "Fine," Collins snapped. "Run the toxicology. Prove this child wrong, so we can get back to real medicine." A nurse scrambled to draw blood, sending the samples to the lab. Every second felt like an hour. The monitor beeped faintly as the billionaire's vitals wavered. David stood perfectly still, his notebook pressed to his chest, eyes fixed on the patient. His father whispered from the corner, "David, are you sure about this?" David nodded slowly. "I'm sure, Dad. It's the only explanation that fits." Minutes ticked by. The room held its breath. Then a technician rushed back in, paper trembling in his hand. "Toxicology results," he stammered. "Positive. Mercury levels are off the charts." The room erupted into gasps. One nurse dropped a tray. Even Dr. Collins stumbled back, color draining from his face. David spoke calmly, as if he had known it all along. "He's being poisoned. That's why none of your treatments are working. You're fixing the wrong problem." Vanessa covered her mouth, eyes brimming with tears. "Oh my God!" Collins tried to recover. "Even if this is true, it doesn't mean..." "It means you were wrong." David cut him off. His voice was steady now, carrying the authority of truth. "You thought he was another case to prove your ego, but you missed the obvious. And if I hadn't spoken, you would have let him die." The younger doctor shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, the janitor's son wasn't just a kid interrupting. He was the only one who had been right. Vanessa turned to him, desperate. "If it's mercury poisoning, what do we do? Can you save him?" David hesitated. He was only 17. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew enough. He had studied enough. And in this moment, the life of one of the richest men in America rested in his hands. He took a deep breath. "Yes, but you'll have to let me lead." The words landed like a bomb. Doctors stared at him in disbelief. Collins exploded. "This is insane. We are trained specialists, and you're suggesting we take orders from a janitor's boy? Absolutely not." But before he could continue, Richard Langston's monitor let out another shrill alarm. His oxygen plummeted. His pulse faltered. His skin turned ashen gray. Vanessa screamed, "Please, just listen to him." David stepped forward, eyes blazing with determination. "If you don't act now, he won't last another 5 minutes." The entire hospital room held its breath. Would 15 doctors swallow their pride and let a janitor's son take the lead? Or would their arrogance cost a billionaire his life? The billionaire's condition was spiraling. The doctors stood paralyzed between pride and desperation. And David Reed, notebook in hand, was about to attempt the impossible, saving a billionaire's life in front of the very men who had dismissed him. The hospital room was silent, except for the piercing alarm of the heart monitor. Richard Langston's pulse dropped lower, until it hovered dangerously close to zero. His chest heaved, his breath shallow and ragged. "Do something." Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking. "Somebody, please." But none of the 15 doctors moved. Their faces were tight with pride and fear. To follow David's lead would mean admitting they'd been wrong. Admitting that a janitor's son had seen what they had missed. David didn't wait. He stepped forward, notebook in hand, voice clear and commanding. "First, you need to stop the cardiac drugs. They're making it worse. Then administer chelation therapy, dimercaprol or Suxymer if you have it. That's the only way to bind the mercury and get it out of the system." Dr. Collins exploded. "This is outrageous. You can't." But before he could finish, the monitor flatlined again. A long, piercing beep filled the room. "Clear!" A doctor shouted, charging the defibrillator. David raised his voice over chaos. "Stop shocking him. It won't work. His heart isn't the problem. It's the poison. Every second you waste, he's slipping further away." The defibrillator hovered inches from Langston's chest. All eyes turned to Vanessa, her father's only daughter, the heir to his empire. Her voice trembled, but her words carried the weight of desperation. "Do what he says." The room froze. Collins turned to her, face red with fury. "You can't be serious." "I said do it." Vanessa snapped. Her tone, sharp as steel, left no room for debate. Slowly, reluctantly, the defibrillator was set aside. Nurses rushed to prepare chelation therapy, following David's precise instructions. Dimercaprol, intramuscular injection. "Do it now," David said firmly, pointing. The nurse hesitated, glancing at Collins. David repeated, sharper this time, "Now!" The injection went in. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then beep. A weak pulse. Another beep. The line steadied. Richard Langston's chest rose, this time deeper, steadier. The monitor flickered back to life. Oxygen climbed. Gasps echoed around the room. Doctors exchanged stunned glances. Nurses covered their mouths. Vanessa's knees buckled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He's stabilizing?" David let out a shaky breath, relief flooding through him. "The treatment's working, but he's not out of danger yet. The mercury's still in his system. He'll need continued therapy and monitoring for complications." Collins stood frozen, his authority shattered. He turned slowly, his eyes boring into David with a mixture of disbelief and rage. "You got lucky," he spat. "That doesn't make you a doctor." David met his gaze, unflinching. "Luck doesn't show up in toxicology reports. Science does, and the science proves I was right." The younger doctors murmured among themselves, some nodding reluctantly. For the first time, Collins looked like the odd man out. Vanessa walked straight to David, her heels clicking against the tile. She placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You saved my father's life. Don't let anyone take that from you." David nodded quietly, but his mind was racing. Poisoning wasn't an accident. This wasn't food gone bad or some industrial spill. Someone wanted Richard Langston dead. He flipped back through his notebook, where he'd written the timeline of symptoms. The rapid decline. The metallic taste was reported just hours before collapse. The dosage is high enough to kill, but subtle enough to pass as a heart attack if untreated. "This wasn't random," David whispered, almost to himself. "Somebody did this on purpose." Vanessa's head snapped toward him. "What do you mean?" David closed his notebook. His eyes were sharp, focused. Mercury doesn't disappear in the body at lethal levels. It had to be given to him, slowly, over time. This was deliberate. Someone's been poisoning your father. The room went dead quiet. Collins scoffed, but there was a tremor in his voice now. "That's speculation. We don't know." David cut him off. "No. Look at the progression. The tremors, the confusion, the memory lapses he's been having for weeks. Those weren't aging symptoms. They were signs of chronic poisoning. Tonight's collapse? That was the final dose." Gasps spread through the staff. A nurse whispered to another, "If that's true, then—" Vanessa's face turned white. She clutched the side of the bed for support. Someone tried to kill him. David nodded grimly. And for the first time, Richard Langston stirred. His eyes fluttered weakly open, unfocused. He tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper escaped. David leaned closer. "Don't strain yourself, sir. You're safe for now." But Langston shook his head faintly. His lips formed a single word. "Her." David froze. "Her." Vanessa leaned in. "Daddy, who? Who did this?" Langston's eyes rolled back, and he slipped into unconsciousness again. The monitor beeped steadily, but the word hung in the air like a curse. "Her." Vanessa's breathing quickened. He said her. Someone close to him, someone he trusted. David's mind raced. If Langston was right, the poisoner was a woman, someone with access, someone who stood to gain from his death. The doctors exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't just treating a patient anymore. They were standing in the middle of a crime scene. Collins muttered, "This is insane. We should call security." Vanessa shouted suddenly, her voice fierce. "Lock down this hospital wing. No one in, no one out, until we find out who tried to murder my father." Guards immediately moved to block the exits. Nurses whispered nervously, fear spreading like fire. David closed his notebook slowly, his mind sharper than ever. He had saved a billionaire's life. But in doing so, he had uncovered something far darker. This wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a conspiracy. And someone in this very hospital didn't want Richard Langston to leave alive. Richard Langston's life had been saved, for now. But his haunting word, her, revealed a shocking truth. Someone close to him had been poisoning him for weeks. As the hospital went into lockdown, David knew one thing. This wasn't over. The real danger was just beginning. The sterile hum of hospital machines filled the silence. Richard Langston lay unconscious, his face pale but stable, oxygen mask covering his mouth. But his last whispered word haunted the room. Her. Vanessa paced back and forth, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Her eyes darted between the unconscious figure of her father and the frightened staff standing frozen around the room. Someone has been poisoning him, she muttered, half to herself, half to everyone. Someone close. Someone he trusted. David stood near the foot of the bed, notebook in hand. His expression wasn't that of a boy anymore. It was sharp, calculating, like a detective piecing together a puzzle. Think about it, he said softly. Mercury poisoning doesn't happen by accident. It had to be given to him in controlled doses. Over time. That means access. Someone who saw him daily. Someone who could get close without suspicion. All eyes turned toward Vanessa. She froze, her voice shaking. You don't think? No, it couldn't be family. David's gaze was steady. Family, staff, or someone with both access and motive. If this is about power, inheritance, or money, then yes, it could be family. The room stirred with unease. One nurse whispered, "But who?" Before anyone could answer, the doors flew open. A tall woman strode in, her designer coat flaring as she moved. Her face was sharp, elegant, with a practiced smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "Vanessa," she said smoothly, ignoring the tension in the room. "What's happening? Why is the hospital locked down?" Vanessa's body stiffened. Her jaw tightened. Mother? It was Evelyn Langston, Richard's estranged wife. Though they had been separated for years, she still carried the name, and everyone knew her reputation. Ambitious, ruthless, and willing to do whatever it took to secure wealth and status. David's eyes narrowed. He recognized the way Vanessa flinched. This wasn't a reunion of love. This was a clash of suspicion. Evelyn glanced at Richard, unconscious on the bed, then at Vanessa. Why wasn't I told he was here? I had to hear it from the news. Her voice was sharp, accusing. But David noticed something else. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from impatience. Vanessa's voice broke, but she stood tall. He collapsed tonight. The doctor said heart failure. But it wasn't that. He was poisoned. The words hit the room like thunder. Gasps echoed. Evelyn's eyes widened for just a second, before narrowing again. Poisoned, she repeated slowly. That's ridiculous. But David caught it. That flicker of fear in her eyes before the mask slipped back on. He stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. It's not ridiculous. Toxicology confirmed it. Mercury poisoning. Administered over weeks, maybe months. Evelyn turned her gaze on him, eyes narrowing. And who are you? David didn't flinch. The one who saved his life when 15 doctors couldn't. Evelyn smirked, dismissive. A janitor's son. How quaint. Marcus bristled in the corner, but David kept his cool. He simply opened his notebook and held it up. Facts don't lie. He was poisoned. And before he went unconscious, your husband whispered one word. Her. The room fell into silence again. All eyes locked on Evelyn. Vanessa's lips parted. Her voice trembled. Mother? Was it you? Evelyn's mask faltered for just a moment before she laughed. Sharp and brittle. Don't be absurd. Why would I poison Richard? David's voice was steady. Because he cut you out of the will. Because the divorce settlement gave you nothing compared to his fortune. And because with him gone, you control everything through Vanessa until she came of age. The air grew heavy. Evelyn's eyes darkened, her perfect facade cracking. Watch your mouth, boy, she hissed. But David stepped closer, his voice cold now. No, you watch. Because I know how mercury poisoning works. It's tasteless when slipped into food. easy to mix with supplements, vitamins, even tea. And according to the staff logs, you were the one who insisted on bringing him his herbal tonics during your surprise visits. Am I wrong? Vanessa's head whipped toward her mother. You brought him tea? Every time. Evelyn's lips pressed tightly. She didn't answer. That was all the confirmation they needed. Vanessa's face crumpled in horror. Mother, why? Evelyn's composure shattered. Her voice rose, bitter and venomous. Why? Because I wasted my life building him up, only to be tossed aside like trash. He humiliated me, stripped me of everything, and left me to rot while he paraded around with his empire. You think I was going to sit quietly and watch him live forever while I faded away? Tears streamed down Vanessa's face. He was still my father. You would have killed him. You nearly did. Evelyn's eyes burned with dangerous madness. And once he was gone, it would have been ours again. Yours and mine. You don't understand now, but you would have thanked me one day. Guard stepped forward, but Evelyn raised her chin defiantly. You have no proof. No jury will convict me without evidence. David closed his notebook, his eyes locked on her. You're right. We don't have hard proof yet. But there are lab tests, witness testimonies, and security footage that shows you bringing him those drinks. That's enough to start. And trust me, justice has a way of catching up. Evelyn's smile twisted, but for the first time, her confidence cracked. Vanessa turned away from her mother, sobbing quietly. The guards moved in. Evelyn's voice echoed through the room as they took her by the arms. You'll regret this, Vanessa. He was never going to give you what you deserved. He would have left you scraps, just like he left me. Vanessa shook her head, tears streaking her face. I'd rather have scraps than blood money. Evelyn was dragged out, her shouts fading down the hall. The room was left in stunned silence. David exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging. He'd saved a billionaire's life. He'd uncovered the poisoner. But the image of Vanessa's broken face weighed on him. Saving lives was one thing. Exposing betrayal within a family was another. He looked at his father, Marcus, who nodded quietly, pride in his tired eyes. But David knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Because if Evelyn had been desperate enough to try to kill Richard Langston, others in his empire might have motives too. And though the billionaire was alive for now, the war for his fortune and his legacy had only just begun. Evelyn Langston had been exposed and dragged away. But as the hospital quieted, a chilling thought struck David. What if she hadn't acted alone? Richard Langston had enemies everywhere, and the poisoning might just be the beginning of a much larger plot. The hospital wing felt eerily quiet after Evelyn's screams faded down the hallway. For the first time in hours, Richard Langston's monitors beeped steadily, his vitals no longer plummeting toward death. Vanessa sat beside him, clutching his hand with trembling fingers. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but there was relief in her eyes, relief that her father was alive, even if the truth about her mother had shattered her heart. David stood silently, notebook still in his grip. His father, Marcus, rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You did what no one else could, he whispered. You saved him. But David's gaze remained on the door where Evelyn had been dragged out. His mind replayed her words. You'll regret this. He was never going to give you what you deserved. Had she acted alone? Or was there more to this story? Within the hour, police arrived at the hospital. Detectives swarmed the halls, questioning staff, reviewing security footage, and securing evidence. The lab confirmed what David had already deduced. Mercury in Richard's bloodstream, levels far above accidental exposure. Footage surfaced of Evelyn visiting multiple times over the past weeks, carrying thermoses and tea containers for her ex-husband. She had signed in under her name, never once hiding her actions. That arrogance would cost her dearly. Detective Alvarez, a grizzled veteran with sharp eyes, shook his head in disbelief. Kid, I've seen a lot of cases in my career, but I've never seen anyone call this shot so fast. You just outsmarted an entire team of specialists. David shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to praise, not from men in suits and badges. I didn't do it for praise, he muttered. I just didn't want to see a man die when the answer was right in front of us. Alvarez studied him for a long moment, then nodded. smart and humble. The world could use more of that. But not everyone felt victorious. Vanessa hadn't moved from her father's side. When the detectives told her Evelyn would face charges of attempted murder, her face crumpled. "She's still my mother," she whispered. How could she do this to us?" David crouched beside her, his voice gentle. "Sometimes the people we trust the most hurt us the worst. But that doesn't mean you have to carry her choices. You stood up for your father. You saved him, too." Vanessa blinked at him, her tears glistening. "No, you saved him. If you hadn't spoken up, he'd be gone." David shook his head. "I only spoke the truth. It was you who forced the doctors to listen." Their eyes met for a brief, heavy moment. Two young people from completely different worlds, united by the night's chaos. Hours later, Richard Langston stirred again. His eyelids fluttered, his lips moving beneath the oxygen mask. Vanessa leaned over, clutching his hand. "Daddy, it's okay. You're safe now." His voice was raspy, weak. "Vanessa? What happened?" David stepped closer, notebook tucked under his arm. "You were poisoned, sir, by mercury. The doctors thought it was a heart attack, but it wasn't." We stopped it in time. Richard's eyes widened slightly, his gaze moving from the doctors to the boys standing in front of him. You're not a doctor." David shook his head. "No, I'm David Reed. My father works here. I just saw what they didn't." For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then, slowly, Richard smiled, a faint, grateful smile. "Then you saved my life, son, and I owe you more than words can repay." Vanessa gripped her father's hand tighter, relief flooding her face. News spread like wildfire. The story of the janitor's genius son, who solved what 15 doctors couldn't, hit the headlines within hours. Social media lit up with hashtags. Hashtag Justice for Langston and hashtag Genius Janitor Son. Clips of Evelyn being escorted out of the hospital went viral. Outrage filled the public sphere. How greed had driven a woman to try and kill the man who once gave her everything. Within days, Evelyn faced formal charges. The evidence was overwhelming. Toxicology reports, security footage, and David's detailed notes, which detectives described as more thorough than some professionals. The hospital board, embarrassed by their doctor's arrogance, issued a public statement. But it wasn't the apology people focused on. It was David Reed's face plastered across every screen. Weeks later, Richard Langston stood on a stage, weaker than before but alive. Beside him stood Vanessa and David and Marcus Reed, dressed in their best suits. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Richard raised a hand. "I stand before you today because of a young man who refused to stay silent. 15 doctors couldn't save me, but one voice did. The voice of a janitor's son. A genius who saw what nobody else could." Applause thundered through the room. David shifted nervously, not used to the spotlight. But Richard wasn't finished. "I owe him my life. And from this day forward, I will make sure no voice is ever silenced because of where they come from or what they wear. That is why I am funding the Reed Scholarship Foundation, to give gifted children from working-class families a chance to study, to innovate, to save lives." The crowd erupted. Marcus's eyes filled with tears, his hand tightening on his son's shoulder. For once, David smiled, not out of pride, but out of hope. As the cameras flashed, the story that began in a chaotic hospital ended with a truth that could not be ignored. Genius has no class, no color, no title. Respect costs nothing, but arrogance can cost lives. And sometimes, the invisible see what everyone else misses. David didn't just save a billionaire. He reminded the world that greatness can come from anywhere. Even the son of a janitor with a notebook full of scribbles. And for those who doubted, mocked, or dismissed him, the moral was clear. Never underestimate someone because of where they come from. Because one day, they may be the only ones who can save you.